July 24th, 1943, 10:45 p.m. The blackened sky over the North Sea hums with engines. Across the waves, in tight formation, nearly 800 Royal Air Force bombers move east, steady and silent. In the cockpit of Lancaster ED-765, Flight Lieutenant Alan "Red" Henderson adjusts his oxygen mask, eyes fixed on the shimmering coastline barely visible ahead. The glow of Hamburg lies over the horizon, faint but spreading, a city unaware of the storm about to descend. "Keep her level, navigator," Henderson calls over the intercom. "Window in 5 minutes." His bombardier, Sergeant William North, glances down at the slim packets stacked by his feet, bundles of silvery strips, each cut with surgical precision. Simple aluminum foil paper, half an inch wide, 27 centimeters long, worthless in itself, but deadly when dropped by the ton. Radar screens deep inside occupied Europe flicker to life. In a bunker near Bremen, Oberleutnant Dieter Schaefer studies the cathode trace of a Würzburg II radar unit. His headphones hiss, pulses dancing across the tube as the British planes approach. Then, chaos. The screen bursts into static confusion, hundreds of phantom echoes spreading like a storm. "For damned!" Schaefer slams his fist against the console. "This can't be right. There are thousands of them." Inside RAF Group Command, thousands of feet above the North Sea, the bomber stream flies blind to the enemy. But the enemy is now blind as well. One by one, the bombers release their chaff, shimmering clouds that drift downward like metallic snow. Moonlight catches the flakes as they scatter, filling the night with a faint, ghostly glitter. "Window away," Henderson says quietly. The strips tumble into the slipstream, twisting and flashing. Below, German searchlight crews in Hamburg sweep the sky desperately, their beams tracing empty air. Sound location mics pick up engines everywhere, but nowhere at once. The radar operators shout conflicting bearings. Confusion spreads. The defense grid that once guided Germany's anti-aircraft guns, the proud Kammhuber line, dissolves into noise. By 12:20 a.m., the first wave crosses the Elbe. Henderson's eyes widen to the sight below, orange flames blooming inside the city as pathfinders mark their targets with incendiary flares. "Marking good," his radio operator reports. "Main force 5 minutes out." Then, from far behind, a dark line of bombers approaches, hundreds of aircraft converging on the illuminated inferno below. In a control post outside Hamburg, General Josef Kammhuber himself stares at a malfunctioning radar chart. His finger traces the arcs of the defense network that had once been his masterpiece, an interlocked series of radar-guided flak zones and night fighter corridors. But tonight, the pattern is gone. Every beam returns static. Every scope shows ghosts. "What are they doing?" one officer demands. Kammhuber removes his glasses, his face pale in the flickering bunker light. "They've blinded us," he murmurs. "They've found a way to blind us." Above, at 22,000 feet, Lancaster ED-765 begins its bombing run. Henderson's voice cracks through the intercom. Bomb doors open. Far below, the city ignites.
July 25th, 1943, 12:57 a.m., Altona District, Hamburg. The first high-explosive bombs tear through apartment blocks like hammers through glass. Brick and mortar dissolve into dust clouds that swallow entire streets. Frau Elsa Hoffmann clutches her 2 children in a basement shelter as the world above collapses. The ceiling shudders, plaster rains down, and the single electric bulb swings wildly before dying. Outside, in the Flak Tower at Heiligen Geistfeld, Hauptmann Ernst Bauer barks orders into 3 phones at once. His 88mm guns rotate desperately, searching for targets they cannot see. "Elevation 22 degrees, fire pattern Bravo." But the shells explode into empty darkness. The predicted altitudes are wrong. The bearings are phantom coordinates. Herr Hauptmann, a young gunner shouts over the roar. The Würzburg shows 200 contacts. Bauer slams the phone down. There aren't 200 bombers over Hamburg. There can't be. But the radar screen insists otherwise.
Each silvery strip of window creates a reflection identical to a four-engine bomber. The German radar operators, trained for precision, now face an impossible equation. Every blip could be aluminum foil drifting on the wind, or a Lancaster carrying 7 tons of high explosive. At Stade Airfield, 30 kilometers west of Hamburg, Oberleutnant Wilhelm Jonen climbs into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighter. His radar operator, Feldwebel Paul Malle, flips switches on the Liechtenstein BC airborne radar mounted in the nose. The cathode screen glows green, then erupts into a blizzard of returns. I can't see anything, Malle says, his voice tight. The entire scope is white noise. Jonen throttles forward anyway, lifting into the firestorm sky. Searchlights sweep in confusion below. Tracer fire arcs randomly into the clouds. He banks hard left, hunting by instinct now. But in a sky filled with metallic snow, instinct is blind.
Control. This is not Jaeger 4-7, requesting vectors. The radio crackles back. Static, confusion, overlapping voices. No vectors, no guidance. The Himmelbett system, Germany's radar-controlled night fighter network, has collapsed. Back over Hamburg, Henderson's Lancaster drops its payload and banks sharply away. Through the Perspex nose, Bombardier Sergeant North watches the firestorm spread below, a sea of orange flame punctuated by explosions that bloom like flowers. The phosphorus incendiaries ignite warehouses, churches, apartment blocks. Within minutes, individual fires merge into a single roaring conflagration. Target destroyed, North reports, his voice hollow. Multiple fires confirmed. Henderson doesn't reply. He's already climbing, banking north toward the rally point over the Elbe estuary. Behind him, wave after wave of bombers continue their runs, 2,300 tons of high explosives and incendiaries falling through the night.
Each aircraft releases window before its attack, ensuring the radar chaos persists. On the ground, in the Flakführer operations room beneath Hamburg city center, General Kamhuber stares at a map that no longer makes sense. Red pins mark flak positions, blue circles represent radar coverage zones, but tonight, the blue circles are meaningless. How many have we shot down, he asks. His aide checks the tally board. 12 confirmed, Herr General, perhaps 3 more probables. 12, out of nearly 800 aircraft. Kamhuber's jaw tightens. On a normal night, the Kamhuber line would account for 40, 50, sometimes 70 bombers. Tonight, the British are flying through Germany's most heavily defended airspace, as if the guns and fighters didn't exist. What is this material they're dropping? Kamhuber demands. We don't know yet, sir. Ground crews report finding strips of metal foil near cross sites. It appears to defeat our entire radar network, Kamhuber interrupts coldly. That's what it appears to do. At 2:15 a.m., the last bombers turn for home. Hamburg burns beneath them, an orange glow visible from 100 miles away. The firestorm's heat creates its own weather, winds of hurricane force that fan the flames and pull debris skyward in towering columns of smoke and ash. Flight Lieutenant Henderson crosses the North Sea in silence. Behind him, in the dark, 746 bombers return to England. Only 12 are missing, a loss rate of barely 1.6%, the lowest of any major raid on Germany. In the wreckage of Hamburg's air defense headquarters, Kamhuber finally receives a sample of window, a handful of aluminum strips collected from the street. He holds them up to the lamplight, studying the thin, glittering metal. So simple, he whispers. So damnably simple. January 1943, somewhere over the English Channel. 6 months before Hamburg burned, a different conversation was taking place in the mahogany-paneled war rooms of the Air Ministry in London. Around a long table sat some of Britain's most brilliant minds, scientists, military planners, intelligence officers, and one man who held a fistful of aluminum strips. Dr. Joan Curran, a young physicist from the telecommunications research establishment, stood before them. In her hand, she held what looked like confetti, thin ribbons of metal foil, precisely cut. "Gentlemen," she began quietly, "this will make their radar useless." The concept was breathtaking in its simplicity. German radar worked by transmitting radio waves that bounce off metal objects, aircraft, and returned as echoes. But aluminum reflected radio waves just as effectively as a bomber's fuselage. Drop enough strips cut to half the wavelength of enemy radar, and each piece would create a false echo. Thousands of strips would create thousands of false targets. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris leaned forward, his weathered face skeptical. "And what's to stop the Germans from doing the same to us?" Silence filled the room. That was the question that had delayed Windows deployment for over a year. Britain's radar network, the chain home system that had saved the nation during the Battle of Britain, was just as vulnerable. If the Luftwaffe discovered the technique, London would burn. "The risk is considerable," admitted Professor R.V. Jones, Churchill's science advisor. "But our intelligence suggests the Germans haven't developed this countermeasure. And frankly, gentlemen, we're losing too many bombers." The numbers were grim. RAF Bomber Command's casualty rates hovered near 5% per mission. Some raids lost 10% or more. At that rate, a bomber crew's chances of surviving a full tour of 30 operations were less than 1 in 4. Harris stubbed out his cigar. "How soon can we deploy it?" "The strips are already manufactured," Dr. Curran replied. "We've been producing them since 1942. We have enough stockpiled for every bomber in the command." The decision went to Churchill himself. In late June 1943, with the invasion of Sicily approaching and the combined bomber offensive intensifying, the Prime Minister gave his approval. The risk of German retaliation was now outweighed by the need to break the back of German industry, and the Kammhuber line had to be destroyed first. Now, 6 months later, Kammhuber stood in a Hamburg command post, holding the proof that Britain had taken that gamble and won. July 28, 1943, 3 days after the first window raid. Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring slammed both fists on the conference table, his face purple with rage. How is this possible? How did our scientists not foresee this? The gathered Luftwaffe officers exchanged uneasy glances. General Wolfgang Martini, chief of Luftwaffe signals, cleared his throat. "Herr Reichsmarschall, our scientists did foresee it. We developed identical countermeasures in 1942. We call them duple, but we chose not to deploy them." "Why not?" Göring roared. "Because we feared the British would copy the technique and use it against our own defensive systems." Martini's voice was flat. "We were protecting our homeland defenses, and the British called our bluff." The irony was devastating. Both sides had independently invented the same technology. Both had stockpiled it. But only Britain had dared to use it first, and now Germany's vaunted air defense network lay in ruins. Kammhuber was summoned to Berlin the next day. In Göring's office, he presented his analysis with military precision. "The Kammhuber line is obsolete. Every radar-guided system we possess has been compromised. We must assume every future raid will employ this window." "Then what do we do?" Göring demanded. "We adopt," Kammhuber replied. "We train our night fighter pilots to hunt without radar guidance. We increase searchlight batteries. We develop new radar frequencies that might be less susceptible. And we deploy our own duple immediately. The British already know the secret." But adaptation would take months, and Hamburg was only the beginning. Back at RAF High Wycombe, Air Marshal Harris studied reconnaissance photographs of the Hamburg ruins. Nearly 40,000 civilians dead, 16 square kilometers of the city center obliterated, and only 12 bombers lost, a stunning reversal of the usual arithmetic of air war. Operation Gomorrah is a success, he announced to his staff. We continue with window on all future operations. His intelligence officer handed him another folder. Sir, signals intercepts confirm the Germans are in complete disarray. Their night fighter units are reporting massive navigation failures. Flak batteries are firing blind. Harris allowed himself a rare smile. Then we press the advantage. Target list, every major city in the Ruhr, beginning tomorrow night. The pieces of aluminum foil, so simple, so cheap, so effective, had just rewritten the rules of strategic bombing. In the summer of 1943, the night skies over Germany belonged to RAF Bomber Command once more. July 30th, 1943, 10:23 p.m. Luftwaffe Base, Rhine, Germany. Major Harjo Hermann stood on the tarmac as mechanics wheeled out his Focke-Wulf 190, its single-seat cockpit gleaming under the floodlights. Around him, 20 more single-engine fighters prepared for launch. Not the twin-engine radar-equipped Bf-110s that had failed so catastrophically over Hamburg, but day fighters stripped for night combat. No radar, Hermann told his pilots during the final briefing. No ground control. You hunt by eye alone. Follow the searchlights. Follow the fires. Follow the bomber stream. We call it wild sow, wild boar tactics. It was a desperate improvisation. With window rendering the Himmelbett radar control system useless, Hermann had proposed something radical. Send day fighters into the chaos of night combat, guided only by visual cues. Let them circle above the target cities, where the fires and searchlights would illuminate the bombers against the smoke-filled sky. At 11:47 p.m., air raid sirens wailed across Remscheid. Another RAF raid, 273 bombers, all dropping window. Once again, German radar screens dissolved into static confusion. But this time, 30 Focke-Wulf 190s climbed into the darkness, their pilots scanning the horizon for the telltale glow of Pathfinder flares. Hermann spotted his first target at 18,000 feet, a Lancaster silhouetted against the burning city below, its 4 engines trailing exhaust. He rolled into position, close to 300 meters, and fired. The cannon shells tore through the bomber's fuselage. Flames erupted from the wing root. The Lancaster rolled, spiraling downward in a death dive. "Abschuss," Hermann shouted into his radio. "First kill confirmed." Below, British bomber crews suddenly faced a new threat. Flight Sergeant James McAllister, mid-upper gunner on Halifax LK-797, spotted a single-engine fighter streak past. Impossibly fast, impossibly aggressive. "Fighter, starboard side," he screamed. His twin Brownings hammered, tracer rounds arcing into the night. The Focke-Wulf vanished into darkness, then reappeared from below, firing. The Halifax shuddered as cannon shells punched through the fuselage. McAllister felt the aircraft lurch, heard his pilot shouting damage reports. They limped toward the North Sea, trailing smoke, one engine dead. That night, Wild Sow fighters shot down 12 RAF bombers, not as many as the Cam Hooper line once achieved, but far more than the Germans had managed since window appeared. It was a small victory, but a psychological one. Germany's night fighter force was adopting. August 2nd, 1943, Peenemünde Research Facility. Dr. Hans Plendl, director of Germany's radar research program, worked through the night in his laboratory. Spread across his desk were samples of window strips recovered from Hamburg, alongside oscilloscope readings and wavelength calculations. His task was simple to state, impossible to solve. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone, slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint, controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. Design a radar system that could see through the metallic blizzard. The British strips are cut to disrupt our Würzburg frequency, he explained to a visiting Luftwaffe technical officer. They're precisely calibrated to 53 centimeters, half our wavelength. So we change frequencies, the officer suggested. Not that simple. We'd need to replace every radar set in Germany. That's thousands of units. It would take a year, maybe more. Plendl removed his glasses, exhausted. But I have another idea. We're developing a new radar called SN2. It operates on a longer wavelength, 3.7 meters. The British window strips won't affect it. The officer leaned forward. How soon? Prototypes are ready. Mass production by November, perhaps December. It was a race against time. The British had won the first round by deploying window, but the Germans were already developing countermeasures.
The question was whether they could deploy them before RAF Bomber Command destroyed Germany's industrial capacity. August 17, 1943, RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, High Wycombe. Air Marshal Harris reviewed the latest loss statistics with grim satisfaction. Since Window's introduction 3 weeks earlier, bomber losses had dropped from 5.5% per mission to under 2%. In pure numbers, before Hamburg, they were losing 40 to 50 aircraft per major raid. Now, losses rarely exceeded 15. "We are winning the night," Harris declared. "For the first time since this war began, we can strike Germany without bleeding ourselves white." His deputy, Air Vice Marshal Robert Sonby, pointed to intelligence reports. "The Germans are adopting, sir. These wild boar tactics are crude, but they're having an effect. And signals intelligence suggests they're rushing new radar sets into production." Harris waved a dismissive hand. "Let them adapt. We'll adapt faster."
Window bought us 3 months of air superiority. That's 3 months to cripple the Ruhr, flatten Berlin, and break German morale. But both men knew the truth. Window was a temporary advantage. Eventually, the Germans would find a way to see through the chaff. The question was, what damage could be done before that happened? In the skies over Germany that summer, the balance of air power had shifted, but the war was far from over.
November 18th, 1943. 5:47 p.m. RAF Coningsby, Lincolnshire. Wing Commander Guy Gibson walked through the pre-flight briefing room, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. Outside, 444 Lancaster bombers prepared for the largest raid yet on Berlin, the heart of the Reich. On the wall behind him, a map showed the route. Across the North Sea, over Holland, deep into Germany, then the final run to the capital. "Gentlemen," Gibson began, his voice steady, "tonight we strike Berlin. The defenses will be the heaviest you've ever faced, but you'll have window, bundles every minute on the approach, continuous throughout the attack." Flight Lieutenant David Shannon, a veteran of the Dams raid, raised his hand. "Sir, intelligence reports the Germans have new radar. Are we certain window still works?" Gibson's expression darkened slightly. "It works, but they're adopting. Expect heavy fighter activity over the target."
The Luftwaffe is throwing everything they have at us now, radar or no radar. He was right to be cautious. By late 1943, the initial shock of window had worn off. German night fighter crews had learned to operate in the chaos. The wild sow tactics had evolved into Zama sow, tame boar, where fighters infiltrated the bomber stream itself, hunting in the darkness without ground control,
following the contrails and exhaust flames of the four-engine bombers. At 6:32 p.m., the first Lancasters lifted off into the winter darkness. Inside each aircraft, crewmen prepared bundles of window, now a standard part of every bomber's ammunition load. Navigator Pilot Officer Edward Johnson, flying in Lancaster DV-385, checked his stopwatch. First window drop in 30 minutes, he announced over the intercom. Across Germany, Luftwaffe bases scrambled their night fighters.
At Wittmannhofen, Hauptmann Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, already an ace with 42 night victories, climbed into his Messerschmitt Bf-110 equipped with the new SN2 radar. The longer wavelength system was less affected by window, though not immune. His radar operator, Feldwebel Fritz Rumpelhart, tested the scope. Contact range reduced but functional. Schnaufer's voice crackled through the intercom. Then we hunt in the old way, with eyes and instinct. At 8:15 p.m., the bomber stream crossed the German coast. Window began falling, a metallic river streaming behind the formation. On the ground, radar operators in Doberitz watched their screens fill with false contacts, but this time they were prepared. Plotting rooms tracked the general direction of the raid despite the clutter. Fighter controllers broadcast open radio calls, large formation heading southeast, all units converge on Berlin. The chaos was different now, organized chaos.
German fighters climbed toward the bomber stream, guided by approximate vectors rather than precise radar control. They searched for the visual markers, engine exhausts glowing orange in the darkness, the distinctive silhouette of a Lancaster against the cloud-scattered moonlight. At 9:47 p.m., Schnaufer spotted his first target, a Halifax trailing the main formation, slightly off course. He closed to 200 meters, his cannon armed. The SN2 radar gave him rough positioning, but the final approach was pure eyesight and feel. He fired. The Halifax's port wing erupted in flames. Schnaufer banked away as the bomber fell, spinning toward the frozen earth below. Inside Lancaster DV-385, Pilot Officer Johnson felt the aircraft shudder as a night fighter streaked past, missing by meters. "Corkscrew starboard," his pilot screamed. The Lancaster rolled into a violent evasive maneuver, diving, twisting, climbing, the G-forces crushing the crew against their seats.
The Bf-110 tried to follow, but lost contact in the darkness. "Window away," Johnson gasped, shoving another bundle out the chute. The aluminum strips tumbled into the night behind them, a glittering shield that might, if they were lucky, confuse the next radar-guided attack. Over Berlin itself, the sky transformed into an inferno of tracer fire and searchlights. Nearly 800 heavy flak guns opened fire simultaneously, throwing up a curtain of exploding shells at 20,000 feet. Window or not, the sheer volume of defensive fire was deadly. Lancaster JB-138 took a direct hit, disintegrating in a fireball that lit up the sky. Halifax MZ-423 lost both port engines and spiraled downward, 7 men trapped inside. Flight Lieutenant Shannon pressed his bomb release as his Lancaster crossed the Tiergarten. Below, incendiaries rained down on government buildings, rail yards, residential districts. Fires spread rapidly in the freezing winter air.
But the cost was mounting. German fighters were everywhere, hunting by sight and sound, infiltrating the bomber stream itself. By midnight, the survivors turned for home. Behind them, Berlin burned with fires visible from 80 miles away. But in the darkness, German fighters continued their pursuit. Schnaufer alone shot down 4 bombers that night. Across the entire Luftwaffe night fighter force, the toll reached 26 RAF aircraft destroyed, nearly 6% of the attacking force. Window had saved hundreds of lives since July, but the advantage was narrowing. The Germans had learned to fight blind, and RAF Bomber Command was paying the price.
March 24th, 1944, 11:34 p.m., 22,000 feet above Nuremberg, Germany. The sky exploded with flak. Pilot officer Cyril Barton fought to keep Lancaster ND-811 level as shrapnel tore through the fuselage. Around him, 96 other bombers were dying, shot down in a single night, the highest loss rate since Windows' introduction 9 months earlier. The aluminum strips still fell from every aircraft, still created their false radar echoes, but it no longer mattered. In the cockpit of Messerschmitt Bf-110G4, Oberleutnant Martin Becker scanned his SN2 radar scope. The screen showed contacts, real contacts, cutting through the window clutter. The new long-wavelength radar wasn't perfect, but combined with visual hunting and improved training, German night fighters had regained their deadly edge. Target bearing 270, range 1,200 meters, his operator called out. Becker pushed the throttle forward.
Within 90 seconds, he had visual confirmation, a Halifax silhouetted against the moonlit clouds. He fired from 150 meters. The bomber's starboard wing disintegrated. No parachutes. 7 men gone in an instant. It was Becker's 58th victory. The night would bring him 3 more. Back at RAF High Wycombe, the morning after Nuremberg, Air Marshal Harris faced the grim statistics. 96 bombers lost, 545 airmen dead or missing. The worst single-night loss of the entire war. Window had been the great equalizer, but the Germans had finally, methodically, found ways to fight through it. They're using longer wavelength radar, his chief scientist reported. Our window strips are ineffective against their new SN2 sets. We'll need to develop new countermeasures, longer strips, different materials. Harris rubbed his temples. How long? Months, perhaps longer. The technological race had come full circle. Britain deployed window. Germany adapted with visual tactics and new radar.
Now Britain would have to adapt again, but each adaptation took time, resources, and lives. April 1944, Flensburg Research Station, Schleswig-Holstein. German scientists had developed another breakthrough, a passive receiver called Flensburg that detected emissions from the British bombers' own tail warning radars. The bombers were, in effect, broadcasting their positions while trying to detect German fighters. It was an elegant trap. British technology betrayed its users. Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Jonen, who had hunted blindly over Hamburg 9 months earlier, now flew with both SN2 radar and Flensburg receiver. I can find them anywhere now, he told his squadron mates. Their own radar leads me straight to them. The pendulum had swung back. By spring 1944, Luftwaffe night fighters were destroying RAF bombers at rates approaching pre-window levels.
The technological advantage of aluminum chaff, so devastating in July 1943, had been systematically countered through German ingenuity and desperation. May 1944, Telecommunications Research Establishment, Malvern, England. Dr. Robert Cockburn examined intelligence reports from captured German night fighters. The SN2 radar, the Flensburg receiver, improved visual tactics the Germans had adopted to every British countermeasure. Now, British scientists worked frantically on the next generation. Longer chaff strips for SN2, modifications to tail radars to prevent Flensburg detection, new jamming techniques. It's an endless cycle, Cockburn admitted to his colleagues. We deploy a countermeasure, they adapt. They deploy a countermeasure, we adapt. There's no permanent advantage, only temporary windows of opportunity. That phrase, windows of opportunity, had given the technique its name, and it perfectly described the nature of electronic warfare.
A constant race between innovation and adaptation, where victory belonged to whoever could adapt fastest. June 5, 1944, RAF Bomber Command Operations Room. The invasion of Normandy was hours away. Harris studied the mission plans for the night's operations, not deep penetration raids on German cities, but tactical strikes on French coastal defenses. Window would play a crucial role again, but differently, creating phantom fleets on German radar screens, drawing attention away from the real invasion beaches. Window drops every 3 minutes across the channel, the operations officer briefed. Small boats will deploy it in patterns mimicking invasion convoys. The Germans will see entire fleets that don't exist. It worked. On D-Day morning, German radar operators reported massive naval formations approaching Pas-de-Calais, phantom armadas created by boats dropping Window in precise patterns. Wehrmacht reinforcements rushed to defend beaches where no invasion came.
Meanwhile, the real Allied fleet landed at Normandy, partially shielded by the electronic deception. Window, the simple aluminum strips that had shocked Germany in 1943, had evolved into a sophisticated instrument of strategic deception. By summer 1944, both sides had fully integrated chaff into their electronic warfare arsenals. The shock was gone, replaced by routine. Every RAF bomber carried Window as standard equipment. Every German radar operator learned to filter through the clutter. The revolutionary weapon had become just another tool in the arsenal, necessary but no longer decisive. The night skies over Europe remained deadly for bomber crews. But the men who dropped those aluminum strips knew one truth. Without Window, the losses would have been catastrophically higher. This simple countermeasure had saved thousands of lives, even as the Germans learned to fight through it.
May 8, 1945. RAF Coningsby, Lincolnshire. Victory in Europe Day. The bombers sat silent on the tarmac, their engines cold for the first time in years. Flight Lieutenant David Shannon walked among them, running his hand along the aluminum skin of Lancaster NN 745. Inside the fuselage, scattered on the floor, lay a few forgotten strips of Window, metallic confetti from 1,000 raids, now relics of a war finally ended. Strange to think something so simple made such a difference, his navigator remarked. Shannon nodded. The numbers told the story. Between July 1943 and May 1945, RAF Bomber Command had dropped over 20,000 tons of Window during operations. The aluminum strips, each one worthless individually, devastating collectively, had been deployed on every major raid for nearly 2 years. Conservative estimates suggested Window reduced bomber losses by 30 to 40% during its most effective period. That translated to lives. Thousands of airmen who flew home instead of dying in burning aircraft over Germany. Thousands of missions that succeeded because German radar operators stared at screens filled with phantom echoes. But the cost had still been staggering. By war's end, RAF Bomber Command had lost 55,573 men killed, nearly half its total aircrew strength. Window had saved many, but it couldn't save everyone. The night skies over Germany had remained lethal until the final days. June 1945. Interrogation Center, Kaufbeuren, Germany. General Joseph Comhauber sat across from British intelligence officers, his face drawn and tired. They asked him about the Comhauber line, about radar defenses, about that night in July 1943 when everything changed. We knew the principle was possible, Comhauber admitted. Our scientists had developed the same technique, Dupel, but we feared you would use it against us if we deployed it first. He paused, bitter irony in his voice. So we held back.
And you called our bluff. How effective was Window in your assessment? The interrogator asked. Comhauber chose his words carefully. In July and August of 1943, it was catastrophic. Our entire defensive system collapsed. We went from shooting down 50 bombers per raid to fewer than 15. It took us months to adapt. New radar, new tactics, new training methods. By 1944, we had largely recovered our effectiveness. But those first months? He shook his head. Those months cost us dearly. The interrogator leaned forward. If Germany had deployed Duple first, how would it have affected the war? Impossible to say. But if our bombers had been able to blind British radar during the Blitz? Kammhuber left the sentence unfinished. Both men understood the implications. August 1945. Telecommunications Research Establishment, Malvern. Dr. Joan Curran stood in her laboratory, surrounded by the apparatus of electronic warfare research. On her desk lay samples of window, the same thin aluminum strips she had presented to military planners 2.5 years earlier. Around her, colleagues were already working on the next generation of countermeasures: radar-absorbing materials, active jamming systems, stealth technologies. What we started with window, she told a visiting American scientist, is now an entire field of warfare. Electronic countermeasures will define future conflicts as much as bombs or bullets. She was right. The legacy of window extended far beyond World War II. The principle of radar jamming through chaff became standard practice in every Air Force worldwide. Modern military aircraft still carry chaff dispensers. The technology evolved. Metallic fibers replaced aluminum strips. Sophisticated patterns replaced random drops. But the core concept remained unchanged. Window had proven a fundamental truth. In technological warfare, the simplest solution is often the most effective. Complex radar networks worth millions of Reichsmarks had been defeated by strips of aluminum foil costing pennies per pound. December 1945, Hamburg, Germany. Werner Hoffmann, now 13 years old, walked through the rebuilt streets near his family's home. The firestorm of July 1943 had killed his mother and sister. He had survived in a basement shelter while the world above burned. Now, 2 years later, the rubble was being cleared, new buildings rising from the ashes. He found a strip of metal in the ruins, corroded, bent, but still recognizable. Window. The material that had blinded German radar and allowed the bombers to strike undetected. To the British, it had been a technological triumph. To Werner, it was a fragment of the night that destroyed his childhood. War, he understood now, had no clean victories. Every innovation that saved lives on one side cost lives on the other. Window had protected British airmen and killed German civilians. There was no escaping that arithmetic. In the years that followed, military historians would debate Window's strategic impact. Some argued it had shortened the war by allowing the combined bomber offensive to proceed with sustainable losses. Others pointed out that Germany adapted quickly, limiting Window's effectiveness. But the airmen who flew through flak-filled skies over the Reich knew the truth in their bones. Window had given them a fighting chance. In the summer of 1943, when Lancaster crews faced near-certain death rates, those aluminum strips had tilted the odds just enough toward survival. The technology spread globally. By the 1950s, every major military power had developed chaff systems. The Vietnam War saw massive chaff deployments. Modern conflicts still employ the technique, now augmented by electronic jamming and stealth technology. And it all began with strips of aluminum foil, precisely cut, dropped by the ton, into the night sky over Hamburg. A weapon so simple, a child could understand it. So effective, it changed the course of the air war. So enduring, it remains in use 80 years later. Window, the countermeasure that shocked the world, then became standard practice in the endless race between detection and deception.